Good morning, everybody. It's good to be back again. We've had a bit of a lull in our webinars, but it is so good to be with you this morning. And thank you to Hounslow Council for being able to, for making this able to happen. Could our fellow speakers turn on their cameras so we can sort of see people? That would be really good. Okay, the climate is and should be at the forefront of our minds. Basically, we're being inundated with news. Over the past 7 days, I've picked up on the following news stories. The first one, global lithium supplies will need to increase by 500% by 2050. At present, most comes from Australia and South America, but Cornish mines are being reopened and investigated because geothermal waters are present in the southwest. So that's good news. But we also need a supply of new materials mined out of the ground: tin, cobalt, graphite. And we should be recycling the materials we use. But to fulfill net zero targets, the growth is too rapid and is outstripping our technological advances. Another interesting thing was an international panel of lawyers has outlined a new crime of ecocide, unlawful or wanton acts committed in the knowledge they might well cause severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment. Campaigners, which include President Macron and the Pope, hope to enshrine ecocide in international law alongside genocide. The courts also have taken a more assertive stance on green issues. In May, a Dutch court ordered Royal Dutch Shell to cut its emissions faster, and Germany promised to review its green targets in response to criticism from its highest court. To achieve net zero by 2050, businesses will need to commit to publish clear and credible carbon reduction plans before they can bid for major government contracts. By September 21, this will apply for contracts above 5 million a year. This figure is only going to reduce as time goes by. And closer to home, manufacturers will soon be legally obliged to make spare parts available for electrical goods so that broken gadgets can be mended rather than thrown away. TfL has introduced its first fleet of 20 hydrogen-powered double-decker buses, which produce no pollution. This adds to the existing 500 buses and over electric buses and over 38,000 hybrid buses. And Hounslow Council aims to reach net zero by 2030. So, an interesting topic this morning, and as I say, so much news. I mean, there was talks today about climate change in the highest temperatures in June in America and in Europe, up by sort of 5 degrees. So everything is, a tad worrying. But hopefully, our panel of experts will, shed some light on this. First up is Barney Close, Race to Zero campaign. In the lead up to COP26 in Glasgow in November, how do we achieve net zero targets by 2050? Barney, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you for having me today. It's delighted to be part of this webinar and speak about this pressing topic to address some of the issues that Sally's touched upon. And as you can see from these types of news, which is coming out kind of every day, the situations that are going on in North America, this really is everyone's issue. I think Lisa has some slides to share, but it's just a quick introduction to me. I am Barney Close, and I am the Environmental Sustainability and UN SDGs Coordinator at West London Business. At West London Business, we work with the business community, academia, incubators and accelerators, as well as think tanks and not-for-profits, governments and public bodies to strengthen the West London supply chain with the aim of making it as sustainable and climate resilient as possible. So to achieve this, I really work across a wide spec of environmental sustainability programs and campaigns, one of which is the Race to Zero campaign. If you could go to the next slide, please, Lisa. So what is the Race to Zero campaign? The objective of Race to Zero is to build momentum around the shift to a decarbonised economy ahead of COP26, where governments must strengthen their contributions to the Paris Agreement. In the last few years, net zero has become the guiding principle for action on climate change. Since the UK became the first major economy to legally commit to reach net zero emissions by 2050, the term has become more commonplace, and we've seen many public and private sector organisations declare climate emergencies and commit to net zero futures. This is a really positive response to the overwhelming evidence about the urgency of the climate crisis, because there's a clear support for a green recovery on an international, national and local level, but we have a really long way to go to achieve these ambitious goals. And the stakes really are high, which is why we talk about the race to zero. So COP26 is going to be hosted in Glasgow between the 1st and 12th of November, where world leaders will convene to commit to urgent action to tackle the climate emergency. And a lot of the targets that have been set within the Paris Agreement will be looked at, and strategies will be put in place to kind of make these net zero goals happen. We know that delivering the promise of that Paris Agreement is going to require whole economy transition. Next slide, please. So what are we doing here at West London Business to kind of to help to achieve this goal? So we focus on innovation in clean tech by helping sustainable organizations grow and flourish. We link people together to support innovation in the aviation industry to hit jet zero through the West London West Innovation District, which birthed from the Blue Sky Conference of Aviation back in November. And we've just launched a Better Futures Plus campaign to help businesses pledging to reach net zero through West London by 2030 and develop their net zero strategy. Through our practical action, we're developing case studies to inspire others to act. And really, we're looking to scale up our work and what we do to get as many businesses as possible over the next year to make their climate commitments and build their confidence in achieving those. It's clear now that by taking climate action, businesses can save money, attract customers and new investors, and gain a competitive advantage. And really, it's about getting ahead. And as Sally said, there's going to be that movement to green investors are really going to only invest in green companies. So we're really looking for the next climate leaders within their industry. Next slide, please. So what are we doing to kind of provide businesses with the tools to kind of do this? We've put together a sustainability tools guide, which will provide you with the tools to get started on your journey, with information on wider policy guidelines, sector-specific tools, so you can track and reduce your emissions to fit your business and stakeholder needs. There are kind of two elements that make up a best practice net zero pathway: a reductions pathway and a removals pathway. These pathways should be delivered in parallel, but the priority should be reducing emissions. Working with our partners, our mission is to turn momentum of the sustainability agenda and programs we touched upon today into practical local action across West London. So setting these challenging sustainability and net zero targets can seem quite daunting and even risky for many businesses, but it will bring significant commercial benefits. And this toolkit is your guide to taking those actions. The resource is designed to signpost tools to support you in measuring and reducing your carbon footprint, making you aware of tools that are there to help and build awareness of your footprint. So some of these tools will take a more holistic view of environmental sustainability, as well as incorporate social, economic and value creation. For example, the built environment. The operation of buildings alone represent around 40% of energy use in many developed economies. Reducing energy use and transitioning towards zero greenhouse emissions in the built environment is going to be critical to sustain the Earth's ecosystems. We have a range of different tools to assess your building's carbon emissions and then go about kind of reducing them. We also have tools to help you with product life cycle analysis. These tools can assist with sustainability decision making from a product and or project level. And if you want to take that deeper dive into your business, we have a sustainable consultancies directory, which offers a range of sustainability consultants across a variety of sectors who can help your business on its transition. Next slide, please. At the Race to Zero launch, there was an interesting report that showed that over half of the global GDP, measured in terms of the actors who make up the global GDP, have committed to or are thinking about setting a net zero target. There are two sides to setting your net zero targets. Corporates can register at the SBTi's Science-Based Targets Initiative through the UN Global Compact, and over 1,000 businesses around the world are working with the SBTi to reduce their emissions in line with the climate science. So if we move to the next slide, we can see how we can see the businesses who have made these commitments within West London. SMEs are really the lifeblood of the economy, and now more than ever, it's imperative that we support the UK's businesses as we look to recover from the impacts of COVID-19. There are over 1 million small and medium-sized businesses within London. So whether you're a corporate or an SME, there are ways to set your science-based targets to make that commitment to becoming net zero by 2050 and halve your emissions by 2030. By setting your target through the SME Climate Hub, you will halve your greenhouse gas emissions before 2030, achieve net zero emissions before 2050, and disclose your progress on a yearly basis. But you're not alone. Along the way, you will unlock incentives and benefits that will make the journey well worth it. This movement is gathering extraordinary momentum, and here at West London Business, we are working with our partners to inspire business ambition to reach the global goals, enable practical action, and shape a responsible business environment across our sub-region and London-wide. We encourage all businesses in our geography to make their climate commitments. Let us know so we can add you to our Race to Zero map and begin your journey to a net zero future. Next slide, please. So just to expand on a few of our projects, we're working with clean tech businesses to really make London a beacon of clean tech innovation, who are striving to lead the way. There are case studies that are going to be crucial to advancing the green agenda. We encourage you to explore our Best Futures directory to discover more fantastic clean tech businesses which can help you on a personal and business level to be more sustainable. And I'll put in the chat a link to our clean tech directory where you can see how all these fantastic innovations are happening. Next slide, please. So through our Better Futures Plus program, we've designed to help 12 businesses in London understand their environmental impacts and design a strategy to reach net zero by 2030. We're working with a carbon auditing tool, which will allow you to measure your impact and also create a reduction plan. And that's now available for West London businesses for free of charge. So if I'll put my my email into the chat, and I'd love to get your email to chat to you about how you can go about measuring your carbon emissions, and then moving forward you can look to reduce them, and how you can achieve that. Thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the speakers.
Thank you very much indeed, Barney. Thank you. Interesting about hospitality, because as you know, the Chamber does an awful lot of events, and it is quite, yeah. And I was looking at the WLB event that I think you've got coming up, and the vegetarian choice is cheaper than the meat choice. And that, I think, is a first that I've seen, that the vegetarian choice being cheaper. So, you know, fascinating. And also, you know, it's getting the quantities right as well. You want people to have enough to eat, but not too much. You don't want stuff left over, but you don't want them going hungry. So it is a bit of an event organiser's nightmare, that one. Anyway, thank you very much indeed, Barney. Thank you. Next up is Councillor Katherine Dunne, full title, Cabinet Member for Communities and Climate Emergency. And I'm hoping you're going to be talking about the development in Brentford of the 100% zero carbon homes. in Orchard Road, but maybe not. Anyway, over to you, Katherine.
Yes, that was understood. So I'm going to talk about it in the context of our broader housing development programme and what we're able to do in terms of carbon reduction in our new schemes. So I'm just going to share my screen. So hopefully that's visible to everyone now. And make sure I've got the controls. Okay, so so as everyone knows, hopefully, the council declared a climate emergency, in 2019, and got quickly working on the climate emergency action plan, and that means we're reviewing all of our arrangements across the whole council, everything we do to reduce the council's carbon footprint in every service area, in all the developments, etc. This obviously was swiftly followed by the COVID-19 crisis, and which you might have thought would set us back in our plans, and obviously it has led to some delays, but it's actually in many ways spurred us on. And so in thinking about our recovery from COVID-19 as a borough, we're very keen to ensure that we stimulate a green recovery, and spoken about various different aspects of it on these webinars at different times. So for us, it's all part and parcel of the same thing, and we're steaming ahead. There's nothing slowing us down now. So part of our ambition is of course for our own council house building program. So hopefully people are aware that we have a manifesto commitment to provide 1,000 new council homes. That's over the 4 years of the current council term, as part of a wider affordable homes programme. Since we've introduced these new measures, we are now ensuring that all of our new council home developments are as energy efficient as they can be. So as the slide says, we will be delivering about 300 units that have a minimum carbon reduction of 83%, which is much more than what's required by planning and the target in the planning policy, which is a minimum 35% carbon reduction. And some of the homes will be greater than 83% carbon reduction, up to 100%, and I'll come on to that shortly. The idea is that these schemes will provide the council with a blueprint for future proposals, so that we can ensure that that this goes ahead into all of our new developments, and it will also help to influence the development of new planning policies, so that it's not just council-led developments that are becoming greener, but all developments across the borough. The low carbon principles that have gone into our home building programme are set out on this slide here. So naturally, the first one is very obvious: no fossil fuels. That the obviously big carbon emitters, and the idea is to eliminate those altogether where that is possible. The next one is a simple building form with minimum external walls to reduce heat loss, and that's a really sort of clear design principle. The simpler you keep the design of your building, then it's easier to keep the heat in. And the more complex that you make it, then the more you're having to mitigate and compensate for that with additional measures. Obviously, then high amounts of insulation, airtight building fabric to make sure that the internal temperature is maintained. And that has to be maintained at a comfortable room temperature throughout the year. So obviously there's technologies that go into creating that as well. And And then we get onto the techie things, so the use of carbon zero technologies such as air source heat pumps and heat recovery systems like MVHR, which stands for mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. And then finally, where we can, where it's feasible, the use of photovoltaic solar panels to provide electricity for heating and so on. So the exemplar project that everyone is excited about, and I'm particularly excited about because it is in my ward in Sion that I represent, is the zero carbon development on Orchard Road. There is a picture there of what it will hopefully look like. So as you can see, it is housing of that fairly simple design as has been described. There's a car slipped in there. It must be a blue badge holder because it will be a car-free development. So only blue badge holders will be able to own and park cars in the vicinity. And there's two reasons for that. One, of course, is that we are trying to discourage car ownership, especially in places like Orchard Road, which is slap bang next to Brentford Station, and also to alleviate pressure, parking pressure on the surrounding roads, which was one of the main objections that came up from existing residents in the area. So this development gained planning permission earlier this year in March. It's not just about being carbon zero, it's obviously part of our plan to meet our housing need. And this one is family-sized homes, 3 and 4 bedrooms, which anyone who follows this sort of thing will know is much needed in the borough. There'll be part of the council's housing stock available to eligible residents at council rents, social rents. They contain cycle storage, outdoor space, and really will be a really nice place to live, I think. And the final bullet point there kind of sums up a really important point as well, which is that, you know, this isn't only beneficial for the environment and the grander scheme of things, but also, you know, for the people who will end up living in those homes. They can, because of the energy efficiency, they can expect to have reduced energy bills and a really good standard of home. So that's the Orchard Road scheme, which we're really excited about. And the good news is it's not the only carbon zero scheme that we're developing. So this slide shows a few more of the schemes that will be have 100% carbon reduction. Some of them have been designed that way. So if you look at the Field Lane and Brickfield Close one, which is another one in Sion Ward, then that was planned from the beginning that would be a carbon zero development. Some of them probably were put in train a little bit earlier on, and so the carbon savings at the planning stage were the typical 35 to 38%. But since then, we've relooked at those to see how we can reduce things further. And for these schemes, we're able to go down to carbon zero. I have counted up the numbers and it adds up to 99. So that's out of those 300 low carbon homes that we'll be building over the next year, then 99 of them will actually be zero carbon, which I think is a really good achievement. And that's the main thing I wanted to say. I've got a couple of additional slides which I don't intend to go through in detail. It's just a bit more detail about the sustainable technologies that are being used on that Orchard Road site and obviously the other ones as well. So this explains how MVHR and air source heat pumps work, which are, I mean, it's a heat exchanger technology, and then ASHP works a bit like a fridge, but instead of just pumping that warm air out, it's utilizing that to heat the homes. And finally, then another one, again, not to go through in detail, but just to, I suppose, to point out that the site itself contains any site that you want to build on will contain restraints as to what design you can put on there, what orientation you need to put your buildings in order to get the best sunlight capture for photovoltaics, etc. And some, of course, will be more friendly and easier to work with than others. And that's one of the reasons why some of these schemes can be carbon zero and some of them will not quite reach that at the moment. But hopefully as new efficiencies and new technologies and improvements are developed, we will reach a point where we can make all of our developments carbon zero. So that's all from me. I will stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Katherine. Thank you. I do remember reading about the Orchard Road site when it got permission. And basically, how do you find your 5 tenants? Because they've got to be able to embrace the technology. So are people queuing up to get these houses, or is that further down the line?
That's an important point. I mean, it is further down the line because obviously we've got planning permission now, but they still need to be built, which hopefully there will be by this time next year or earlier. So that, I mean, there'll be council homes, so they'll be available to people on the housing register, and we do have quite, I suppose there's quite a regulated way in which people are chosen for new homes, obviously to try and make that as fair as possible. But the point that you've made is really important, and we do need to make sure that the people who are going into those homes know how to use the technologies and are happy with that. We won't just stick people in and say get on with it. There'll obviously be training provided. It's more of a change of mindset, I would say, than anything else, because people are used to, you turn your heating on at this point in time, you turn it up, and maybe having that manual control that they're not going to necessarily need so much, because it'll be sort of more even and not requiring so much input from people. But as it becomes more and more, we're not only looking at new homes, we've applied for lots of funding to retrofit our existing council buildings. So it is something that actually lots of people are going to have to embrace, and we'll help them with that as much as possible.
Lovely, thank you very much. I now see that Matt Prescott from Heathrow has joined us, which is great, because really this is the big one. It's aviation fuel. Matt, the floor is yours to talk about sustainable aviation fuel.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to come and join you, Sally. I'm going to share my screen. I'm afraid, probably need to take a second just to ask my computer to allow me to do so, because we're natives to MS Teams at Heathrow, so Zoom is always a challenge. So I have hopefully shared a screen. I hate to ask, but could you confirm you can see it?
Yes, we can see it, but are you able to press the presentation button? That's it, Will. Super.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, that was smoother than I expected. So, and Sally, remind me, have I got about 10 minutes to?
About 10 minutes, yeah.
To outline, yeah. So I'll try and canter through quite quickly in case there are any questions. This is obviously a huge topic, and we could talk all day about it. So I would be really interested to hear what specific inquiries you might have following this brief intro. Essentially, we've determined that there are 4 key solutions to decarbonising flight. Obviously, we also are focused on decarbonising the airport. A lot of this focuses around efficiency in the first instance, and then we move into changing the fuels and then embracing next generation aircraft technology. The key opportunity in efficiency is, well, the two primary ones. One is airspace modernisation. Our airspace, much as it is essentially invisible, was designed decades ago, and modern aircraft are capable of flying in a much more sophisticated fashion. And by modernising airspace, we can reduce issues, things like stacking, and chart much more efficient routes for aircraft, taking account of weather conditions and all sorts of details like that. So we can save a good chunk of emissions through airspace modernisation. The other thing in terms of efficiency is an airline will typically buy an aircraft for a circa 25-year expected life as an asset, which means that you've got a fleet renewal rate of about 4% per annum. And every time a new aircraft enters the fleet, it's about a percentage point, give or take, more efficient than it would have been the previous year. So there's some significant incremental improvements through fleet renewal. But these don't do anything near enough to decarbonise aviation because, notwithstanding the pandemic, passenger numbers continue to grow. And so the big solution is around changing the fuel. So switching from kerosene to sustainable aviation fuels is absolutely at the top of the list in terms of decarbonisation opportunities, because it already exists, it's already certified, it's already in use, and it's safe. Additionally, we don't have to change any of the infrastructure at the airport. It finds its way onto aeroplanes in the very exact same way that kerosene does. It arrives in pipelines at Heathrow. It's just a question of upstream production being accelerated. And then finally, we're also looking at the role of next generation aircraft, particularly hydrogen, and particularly hydrogen fuel cell aircraft for the kind of narrow body, short haul type of aircraft that you'd be familiar with today. So specifically to talk about SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. So this is actually a suite of different technologies which span, we tend to refer to these as second generation biofuels in the first instance. So these are not direct competition for land use, particularly with food. These are generally bio wastes. So these will be manufactured from things like waste from the food manufacturing sector, oils, fats in particular. And these fuels exist today and are the predominant SAF in the market currently. But there are also other technologies. Recycled carbon fuel is the term used to refer to technologies that take, for instance, waste to jet fuel. So probably the first UK production facility will be using this technology, taking domestic household waste and converting that into SAF. And then at the more exciting end of the spectrum, the technology that's further away is fully synthetic aviation fuel. And this can be manufactured from various sources, but that can include captured carbon. So, albeit further away, there is the potential to produce carbon neutral or potentially even carbon negative sustainable aviation fuels in the fullness of time when combined with carbon capture and storage. The life cycle carbon impact of these fuels is significant, that even these second generation fuels that are available now are upwards of a 50% carbon saving on a life cycle basis with respect to kerosene. And as I say, that percentage will increase towards the 2040s. So some of those synthetic fuels need some considerable time to fully develop, but we are already seeing early stage demonstration projects at a small scale. In terms of the role of SAF, as I say, we've identified SAF as the key tool for this decade, and that's because it is not only available now, but also that some of the alternatives methods to decarbonising aviation need a little bit more time to develop. So particularly I refer to hydrogen fuel cell, but there's also obviously an opportunity around battery electric and liquid hydrogen for propulsion. But as you can see from this table, depending on the type of aircraft and the type of journey that we're referring to, some of those technologies are quite a long way off for the type of journeys that you see completed through Heathrow. So particularly the long haul portion of Heathrow's traffic is not expecting to see a contribution in any great to any great extent from some of these alternative technologies. However, they do play a very exciting role in the relatively near term for regional and domestic aviation. And that's something, as I say, we're looking at and is very exciting. And a bit like the early electric vehicles on the roads, if you think back to some of the sort of gee whiz type vehicles that we maybe saw a decade or more ago, the capability of these aircraft and the kind of mission profiles they can complete will grow over time. And around about 2035, we would expect to see aircraft with seats in the 100 to 200 class flying zero emissions. Obviously, that does relate strongly to the UK's hydrogen strategy. And also there's a real imperative for further electrification and high voltage capacity at the airport. Very quickly then, it's worth saying there's a strong economic opportunity associated with SAF. The UK has a lot of the capability in place, and a lot of the thinking has been done around the economic contribution in terms of jobs and GVA that we would see. And then in terms of how we move forward, there's a pretty strong imperative for this to focus around policy, getting the policy framework right. We're seeing in California, the SAF market has really started to take off at pace, and that's because they've got the right incentives in place for the investor community. So we're really focusing our effort on advocating the right policy on the demand and the supply side in the lead up to COP26. Apologies for the typo there. We're also looking at what we can do at Heathrow. So we're considering incentives in landing charges this year that we're discussing with airlines currently and during the summer. So we hope to be able to introduce that next year. We've also looked at identifying space on airport to incubate startups and small scale pilots where we can play a role to help push companies through the TRLs and start to really promote UK production. And as well, we're currently looking at introducing SAF offsets into the passenger proposition, and a lot of corporate organisations are starting to really move on this. So essentially paying for a volume of SAF to cover the seats that they occupy on aircraft. So I think that was it in terms of slides. There's probably not much time, apologies, but very happy to take any quick questions.
Thank you so much indeed, Matt. It's fascinating. I'm going to bring this down to my level. So basically my potato peelings could be flying an aeroplane to Glasgow at some stage.
Effectively, they're not very high in oils you're peeling,
Right.
but effectively, yes.
Okay.
Certainly the sandwich wrapper from M&S, you know, perfect. A bit of grease and butter on there and some nice plastic film. That's perfect for making fuel. And actually a lot of the problem plastic wastes that we have currently are absolutely suitable for use as fuels. Not only aviation fuel, of course, could be used for road fuel equally, but we need to capture these feedstocks to get ourselves away from fossil kerosene.
Has any of the panel got any questions for Matt? Because he does have to sort of jump off now as well. No? Well, Matt, thank you.
I've got a quick question, Sally. Hello, Matt.
Hi,
I've did a little bit of Googling while you were talking as well, and I saw that Rolls-Royce have been testing the SAF products on their engines since the beginning of last year. So they should start to come into operational use quite quickly. And companies like Rolls-Royce actually lease their engines out to airlines, as the airlines also lease the aircraft themselves. So companies like British Airways and the airlines themselves don't own the engine. So therefore it should be quite quick for the aero engine manufacturers to swap over standard kerosene aviation fuel into SAF, as you say. But Heathrow is a long haul operator. And the key answer to this with long haul flights is hydrocarbon. And that's not going to start to come into play for long haul flights until about 2050. So where does that leave Heathrow as a long haul flight operator between now and 2050? 30 years is a long way into the future.
Alan, so SAF can be used on any flight of any distance. So the good news is that we actually had our first delivery of SAF in June this year. So very small quantity, but it went into the hydrant system.
My first mobile phone wasn't small, it was quite big, but it got smaller.
Exactly, it's a start and it's really promising. So there's a further delivery expected this month, which is bigger. So it's already started to flow into the hydrant. And the way it works at Heathrow is if you want to refuel your aircraft, you draw the same fuel that everybody else does from the hydrant. So effectively, every single departure for a couple of days in early June will have had a small percentage blend of SAF on board. Those flights would have been short haul or long haul. There would have been a mix. So it is a now solution, which is why we're pushing it. The barrier is volume of production and the cost. So we need to scale up production, and that includes UK production. And for that, we really need the right policies to support something like a contract for difference, for instance. And on the demand side, we're already seeing both airlines making fabulous commitments. BA have committed to 10% SAF by 2030, which sounds like a relatively small percentage, but believe me, that's a significant shift early in the market. And then, as I say, we're also seeing corporates, like the large consultancies, the global consultancies, starting to say, we'd like to pay extra to support the development of SAF and buy SAF for use, whether it's on that specific plane or another one is in a way immaterial here. It's about driving the market at the present time. So
yeah, I spotted the European Union wants by 2035 most of the flights in Europe to be on SAF.
Yeah, so EU is shortly to publish a mandate for 2030, and SAF will be part of the answer. You'll also probably notice that particularly in France, they're backing hydrogen in a big way. So there's a mixed economy of solutions, and it's going to be definitely a both and. But for sure, there's a big economic opportunity for the UK. We're slightly behind the US. We've got a chance to move ahead of the EU, and we're really pushing hard to make sure that we capitalise on the opportunity. And obviously, it cuts Heathrow's what's called Scope 3 carbon footprint. So the carbon footprint owned by the airlines matters to us because we all go out of business if we can't solve the carbon challenge.
Thank you very much, Matt. There's a quick question from Paul in the chat box, Paul Vick. Are there plane designs being developed to be more efficient in the design of flying itself? Surely this would be an important start.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, conventional aircraft are about 1% more efficient every year, and this is largely around lightweighting and some improvements in different components. So that's an economic imperative because fuel is the biggest cost for an airline. So it's in the interest of the manufacturers, the OEMs and the airlines to push efficiency as far as they can. So that I'd say that's probably at its maximum, and that will stay there. And what that means is that obviously in 5 years' time, you only need 95% as much fuel on board. So it reduces the pressure to produce things like sustainable aviation fuel, or indeed liquid hydrogen, or whatever the technology will be as we move forward.
I mean, my question is actually a bit more than that. It seems there's a whole conceptual world here that is not being embraced. The assumption here is not zero carbon, actually, from the get-go, and notwithstanding it's not going to be very easy, you know, isn't there a way where the efficiency of flying, the physics of flying, if you like, that notion of R&D, shouldn't the ambition be, if we're going to have a zero carbon plane, to get the efficiency of flying itself? You know, why aren't the targets, why aren't we just saying we need 50% less fuel? Surely the science, that is where we should be starting with. You know, how do we change our understanding of flying, you know, from the Wright brothers through to jets, which have become very, and I'm no expert on this, but, you know, jets that are used to fly as much by, not by the physics of flying itself, but by technology that changes the way we allow us to stay afloat, but actually just making it inherently a lot less energy required, you know, whether that is a combination of gliding and, you know, physical propulsion. But surely there should be a conceptual way of changing this. And by 2050, that's quite a long time in R&D terms, given we've got a new vaccine in less than a year, that isn't even on the agenda by the looks of things. And I'm sure there's some pockets of it somewhere, but it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit more about what's going on that front, because that strikes me as where the answer might lie, notwithstanding all these other good initiatives, but they don't look like they're going to get the answer, not by themselves. Okay,
so there's quite a lot in there, I think, Paul. So in terms of the sort of more radical innovation around airframes, which I think is what you're getting at. What we refer to something called blended wing, which is effectively that big leap forward in terms of the airframe, the real design of the aircraft. If you have a look at Airbus 0E on the internet, you'll see the concepts that they released late last year, one of which is a blended wing hydrogen aircraft. The danger is that people have been talking about these radical reinvention of airframes for some time, and I think there's a risk that it becomes a distraction from the job of getting carbon out from conventional aircraft and introducing. Think about the first Prius. I mean, I was lucky enough, my partner had one to drive in those, and you could pretty much drive around a car park without any tailpipe emissions. But the minute you got on the motorway, you had, you know, you'd go 5 yards and it would kick in. Now, then, you know, a Prius now would obviously probably take you 50 miles or more without the engine kicking in. Now, the same thing will be true in terms of innovation around aircraft. So hybrid electric is one of the technologies that you might see introduced towards the end of this decade. And what that would offer is potentially a takeoff on electric or cruise on electric, but using kerosene or SAF for the balance. And I think that's the kind of innovation that we're seeing coming through now. And I think the blended wing, entirely new airframe, is still a little bit futuristic. So it feels wrong to pin our hopes to a completely new model. However, for something like freight, you could certainly look at airships. You know, there are radical alternatives to conventional aircraft in some use cases. The other part, I think, of your challenge is more around the commercial model, or indeed the behavioral model, which might, for instance, say that if we can have a battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell aircraft taking us 1,000 miles in 10 years from now, if you wanted to travel to Malaysia, well, maybe you just take 2 or 3 flights, one. So that would be the alternative way. So for a leisure market, maybe we need to kind of mean, it sounds like an oxymoron, but we need slow air travel. And so I think that's what you're getting at. For sure, there are some great ideas in that arena. We're trying to be innovative, but also pragmatic. We need to get carbon out this decade, so we're focused squarely on that. We must have emissions in 2030 that are lower than 2019 in absolute terms, and we're really clear about that objective. So we're very much focused on the technologies that will deliver that.
Thank you. No, that's really interesting.
And thank you so much. I'm aware of time, and I know that you're a man on a mission, Matt. A few quick questions. Can you mix SAF with normal kerosene?
Yes. In fact, SAF is only certified up to 50% currently. The Rolls-Royce demonstration that Paul referred to was 100%. So Rolls-Royce have now done that, and they've designed an engine that can burn SAF at 100%, but those are currently not in service. Any aircraft in service now can burn SAF in its engine up to a 50% blend.
Thank you. Another quick one. Hold on, what was the quick one? It's disappeared. Hold on. You spoke about landing charges. Is this for passengers or airline companies?
Airlines.
Thank you. We like quick questions. Right, this is from Robin Cairns. Robin's son is involved as a project manager on an upgrade to the oil pipeline to London Heathrow from Forley. Will this be capable for SAF? From
Forley, I don't believe there's any reason why not. I'm not an expert on pipelines. My understanding is there may be some upgrades required, but that we would not be expecting to build new pipelines. We would be expecting to use existing. So Forley would stay and be used to transport SAF. And you may have noticed on that map that I produced, some of the analysis shows that Forley is one of the 7 locations where SAF could be produced, and with a couple of different viable technologies, including waste to jet. So that would be a really good opportunity for Southampton and the region there.
Thank you very much. I think that's all the questions done. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Matt. I think next webinar should be sort of maybe on R&D. Anyway, we'll let you go. Thank you again. Right, our next speaker.
Sorry, Sally, could I interrupt for a second? Sorry to interject. My colleague Ivan Dunne is not in the office, and he'd like to join. And I just SMS'd you and wondered if you'd be kind enough to send him an invite so he could join.
Lovely. I've just sent a direct message to Lisa, who's behind the scenes, and hopefully she'll be inviting to join as part of the audience. All right.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Great to meet you all this morning.
Thank you, Matt. Our next speaker is Paul Vick from Paul Vick Architects, who is a supportive chamber member, and I've known Paul for many a year. So Paul, I know sometimes you will go over your 10 minutes, and I'm aware of time. So can you keep it to the 10 minutes? Thank you very much.
Yes, certainly. And I'm trying to get this to work here. Okay, super. Well, thank you very much. So I'm going to go very quickly here. We're architects. We also have a strong interest in how you scale this sort of approach, because it's not a one-dimensional approach. And I'll show you a model we've been using for the last, which we've developed really from the last 20 years or so. And I'll give a quick background, and then I'll fly through a project. It can be done. And I'm just going to leave you with 2 sort of thoughts at the end, one of resilience and the other of scaling from our sort of understanding. So I'm going to whiz through this very quickly. Feel free to get in contact if there are more questions. And I promise to keep to 10 minutes, even if it feels a little bit abstract at times from the speed. So I go back to this sort of point, 1987. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising that of the future to meet their own needs. We should not forget this as we go through this process now, I believe. In 1987, Brundtland identified social and institutional frameworks. She doesn't believe the technological challenges are actually going to be the issue. And certainly in our world, that has been the case for quite a long time. It's now the rest of the world is starting to catch up politically and economically. So it's all there for the taking in our view. Some of the things we've looked at, there have been new ideas of economy emerging, the limits of growth. In the 60s, we're talking about the fact that it was not externalities that were put into the economic system, but the fact that what we now call the circular economy, that there is a whole cycle. The question really is, what are those contexts of cycles? And we see this now, for instance, the planetary boundaries, where they say we're going over thresholds, and they can see those thresholds that we're going over, and it's going to be very difficult to get back again. So again, the whole notion of how we think about this is changing and will continue to change. And we're not working in isolation. Then we see in 21, so here we are, what, 40 years after all of this has been aired, the plan for growth starting to come into the government process. This is their statement for Build Back Better. What's interesting about this is what I've highlighted here, is they've targeted in their chapters investment, infrastructure, skills and innovation, equality effectively, and net zero. These are all being affected directly, as many people have highlighted already today. So the green investment is taking off at a major scale development side as a requirement often for a low carbon and net zero to even raise the funding now. So it's a whole infrastructure. So we're seeing that happen. So yes, we would be forgiven for thinking there is a lot about this to get right. The fact is it's about people, whether it's economy and whether it's about systems or politics. And it's really about political will and getting economic incentive right as we see it. So the model we start to think about, use, how do you make things more efficient? How do you make it the home? The Marxian dialectic, if you like, use, value and economic value. These are just two sorts of forms. There's also social value, which we associate with social cohesion, community, greater teamwork, networks, the environmental value, and these are all measurable. This is the other thing that's very important: healthier, longer lasting, reduced sick days. So when we talk about the sustainability, the thread of the golden thread, they talk about economic, social, environmental. It's a little bit more, we believe it can be extended a little bit further really when we come to talk about building and architecture. Identity value, brand, sense of belonging, our position in the world. Without that, you probably don't get purpose and motivation. Cultural, this is the way we relate to each other, and provides basically this idea that why would you want to keep coming back, and how do you make beautiful buildings that are attractive? These are sort of fundamental underlying factors of all of these things. What's very important about this is if you put all these value streams into a development, you get resilience and enhanced returns. This meets these political and environment and economic incentives that I was talking about. And we've seen this again and again across developments. If you look at a multi-value approach, then it will keep lasting for a long time. As the demographies change, for example, which they will over 10, 20, 30, 50 years, then how do you keep it relevant without having to rebuild it? And then you've got technologies, which we can talk about in more detail in the Q&A about, if a boiler lasts 15 years, how do we get around having to replace a boiler? Well, the ambition perhaps isn't high enough here. It should be perhaps we need buildings without boilers. What is the answer to that? And we're starting to get there with air source heat pumps and the rest of it, but the technology is moving on as well. So many of the things that Katherine was talking about, it's nice to see these starting to come in, but I still think the ambition needs to be long-term and the fundamentals mustn't be forgotten. So some examples that I've been involved in that looks at all these values. I drafted the British Museum Master Plan for the next 50 to 100 years, cultural institution, very old buildings. Some of them are not fit for purpose. Some need to be knocked down. The political side of it is interesting in many ways. They've had Africa Days. They've had a dinner, which was very interesting, where they put a Persian statue on the table and they had David Dimbleby there, they had the director there, and they had the American ambassador, and they said, this is a Persian statue of 2,000 years. Let's talk about the Middle East. In other words, these relationships are allowed to change, they will change, but the political will can be engaged through both soft power and direct technological and economic policy, as well as at the time of the building, there were some very low energy ideas through natural ventilation used here. Moving on, I wrote a vision for the Diocese of London. Again, they've got a 1400-year-old legacy in the UK. That's longer than our monarchy continuously, nearly the longest in the country. I think the only longer one is the Corporation of London. So they have, they've been looking at settlements around education. Their biggest regeneration project was St. Paul's Cathedral after the Great Fire. In terms of reusing building, it's fundamental. The use of traffic and pedestrian space is again fundamental. Mixed use and the role of well-being, sort of in a countercultural way, that when things go wrong, people need more of this type of economy. And they obviously have a network that is worldwide, and not just in the Anglican, but if you then add in other groups within the Christian, you're talking about 1 billion people within this network. This is surely some of the trends that we're starting to see now being hooked up, but they've been doing it for an awfully long time. What is the future for having a balanced sort of way forward and through zero carbon? This is an 8,000 home zero carbon development we designed 20 years ago. So just think about that. We're just playing catch up. It's possible, but it's about ambition and it's about doing it in the right way. And I can run you through some of the design principles in a minute. So these things are possible. And we're talking about how people work, how people live, how we get energy resilience in. Even then we were talking about an all electric future, but it's about how the future of that electricity is produced as much as anything else. Things we're starting to see, particularly around universities and their campuses and how they deal with that. So that context of the circular economy is different for the system of energy production than it is, say, for where you work. If you work out of your garage or work from home, or if in this case, this was in Northeast London, your relationship to London and the metropolitan area itself. I ran White City at Shepherd's Bush for 2 years for in its control. So the experience, they talk about experience and shopping, and this was to be the first naturally ventilated shopping centre in the world, Oxford Street with a tent over it. So when it was bought by the current owners, they went for a slightly different model, and it isn't that, but we know it is possible to do. So the question is, how do we make this incentive work? This is in Hounslow. This is a studio theatre at Brentford School for Girls. We did about 10 years ago. The question here for us, and what illustrates this at the nuts and bolts level, is that after we started, within 3 weeks, we wanted a building twice the size for the same amount of money. How do you face that problem? And part of their question was they wanted an area where they could gather before they actually have a performance. So this open space at the front, we asked lots of questions, but the principle really of the linkage here is if you don't need it, don't build it. So this is semi-enclosed, in which case you don't have the need or the expectancy to have a fully insulated reception space. You just don't need it. You put on the jumper. It's very old-fashioned approach, if you like. At the same time, within the theatre, we expanded it by a metre, which allowed them to do A-level dance, but any more was not worth the economy and means. And then within it, we realised there's lots of things you don't need that you have in theatres. And again, it was designed to be, we think, the first naturally ventilated internal theatre in the world. But again, building regs actually mitigated against it in the very hot 2 or 3 days at the very hot time of summer and the very cold 2 or 3 days in the very cold line of winter. So again, there's a question of how behavior works and how you design your buildings, but it's possible, and an economy. And in this case, creating an identity of resilience, these metal meshes, etc., very resilient, but giving it the identity. And we can talk about language, etc. They have 40 different languages. So this became the architecture of freedom, if you like. And we were shortlisted for Architect of the Year for that. This is different forms of work. We're seeing this is an innovation hub we're involved in. So the values we're talking about here are, this is at Smithfield Market with the Corporation of London. How do, whatever side of the political divide you are, left or right, the economy of innovation and startups is, understood as a real driver of economy. So how do you do that within a building? And what we realized was, how do we use the existing infrastructure outside of the building, particularly for informal working, restaurants, the whole lot of it? How do we start to use that, even though we've got different forms of working inside, and work with the invisible structures of setting up businesses, providing good finances, and there's lots of examples of that. This is a different form of approach. This is in Hounslow as well. It's a glass bridge for a telecommunications company. And for them, they wanted a glass bridge that showed off their identity. They do work with the White House, for example, in the United States. And one of our questions then was, well, what's the bridge connecting? Because that surely it's more than just an identity value. And yes, it allowed them to get rid of a second reception, in fact. And so we started looking at that, increasing their workspace density within the same space. So this is now built. And well, that's it really. These are other low energy towers we've looked at. The one on the right is adding 4 stories, 6 stories to a 4-story building and change of use. The left is a new build pin tower. So that's, how do you get all these values in, use value, thinking about all of these things at the same time within whatever type of building actually provides future resilience. And that is how we view the way to get to the answer, really. So I'm going to go very quickly now through one larger, a couple of projects. This is a project in Northampton. On the right is a enclosure from 1816 used for the Royal Ordnance. It was a military complex. The Grand Canal that runs through the middle here, you can probably see my cursor, was a spur off the canal, Grand Canal from Birmingham, which brought the arms down. This enclosure was built, it's about 20 acres, and we're looking at the regeneration of this. On the left-hand side is the magazine store, so the explosives were away from where the accommodation and artillery was. In 2016, you can see here the original enclosure, the canal here, and the magazine enclosure. So all this housing is being built round, and light industrial here. How do you make these, bring this regeneration back to life? We're all facing it across the country, and this is all grade 2 listed as well. Here it is, you can see the canal through the middle, these big blocks here with big gaps, so there's easy access to the canal for logistics. And so this site has witnessed the industrial revolution basically to today. So again, infrastructure has a longer life than it does other elements. So again, thinking about in terms of the life cycle and demography, how those interact, there's examples coming through now internationally of this type of thinking. So from canals to trains, before that they had horses pulling the artillery, then they went to trucks, and that's been demilitarized in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and what's next? This is the vision. So we're seeing here, and we did a vision about 5-10 years ago, and we've been getting permissions for it one at a time. This has become a visitors center. And also perhaps what's silent about the site that we discovered was that there used to be there's been about 2,000 people working on this site throughout its life. And from that, you have families of families, and there's a sort of whole history going on with linkages back to the site. What is the future of that? And they identify within their local plan, all this is in the public arena, of where they think that the demography is going to go. And this sense of the older generation mixed with the younger is something that's coming through, and some things we see in many places, but in different ways. So here we've already got retail shops in here with a historic background. We're seeing we've got super fast broadband put in, so there's hub working already. So there's different sort of modalities of innovation hub based not a million miles away from what you saw before in the one in Smithfield. Here we've got new build low energy family homes of different sizes. as well as workshops. And down here, we've got a care home with forms of independent living, first age to third age. So they're called close care. So it's not just how does a family develop and stay in a house, but also actually how do you develop that into later needs. And through that, you then can have a whole generation and generations mixed on the site. And it becomes then a sort of a small city, a community in itself, and that resilience. So we talked about these.
Sorry, Paul, I'm so aware of time. I know you're passionate about what you do, but I really do think we're going to have to draw a close quite soon.
Okay, no problem. So this is the site. I'm just going to show you these and not talk too much about them. These are the sites that are beautiful, permeability. This is how it was. And simply by clearing up, it's become a beautiful and more usable and desirable place. We put in a hotel on the right, potentially. Here, the shops are being opened up to the public. This is the demographic review. And it was based on a low energy house we did again several years ago now, of how do you create a first age to third age house, which is low energy. And this was built, and I'm just going to go through very quickly. This was built to passive house standards, 3 to 4 times the building regs requirement at the time. And how do you create a house where these people can live through? And this notion of small footprint, but beautiful, desirable, and highly usable was one of the things that came out of it. And I could talk about art and culture because they're fundamental, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to flick through and say.
Another time, Paul. Thank you so much indeed. Thank you. I live very close to Brentford School for Girls, so actually, and I didn't realise you were responsible for their theatre, so thank you for that. Also, looking at your cavalry site, it reminds me of Inland Homes are developing Hounslow West, the barracks in Hounslow, and that do try to come along to our regen event on the 23rd of July, because they will have a stand and that you'll be able to see their plans for that site. Thank you so much indeed, Paul. Right, next up, and I'm horribly aware of time, is Chris Smith of Meld Energy. Chris, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Sally. How many more people have we got? So how long have I?
We've got you to speak, I've got Conor, and then we've got Winston. Okay. And then Alan to say a few words. So basically 3.
Okay, so I got to condense into about 7 minutes, I think.
Great, so sorry.
To be fair to the others. Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today at this webinar. All very interesting topics ahead. What I'm going to do is just take you through who we are as Meld Energy, take you through what we see some of the issues are within green energy, within net zero, and talk about some of our projects and perhaps set out some challenges. So who we are as Meld, we actually formed last year, which was really the culmination of a bit of a dream of mine, which was to put together a bunch of the very best people I've worked with over my career, and then just go do what we want to do to make a difference, which really has all been about net zero. We were very grateful to Theresa May in mid-2019, giving it a name, net zero, because that's ultimately what we've been doing for a number of years. So we work with all sorts of different people, from the public sector, the private sector, public-private sector, essentially developing strategies, developing projects, and delivering net zero. Really, it's all around accelerating the transition to net zero, and it's been very interesting hearing some of the talks today. Barney, we should connect because we probably need to make that declaration as well. Even though we need to make that declaration. What we see as the challenges, so renewable expansion is great. We're seeing a lot of expansion. Over 50% of the UK grid is clean energy now, and that's rising reasonably fast. It's a mixture of offshore wind, solar PV, battery storage is having a role to play. We are seeing more nuclear, and perhaps we should see more nuclear. As Katherine said earlier on, 70%, lots of local authorities have declared a climate emergency, 70% or 71%. What worries me is that 30% haven't. We are also seeing quite an interesting competition amongst local authorities across the UK as to who's going to get to net zero first. One of our clients has said that they're going to be net zero by 2025. We're trying to help them revise that slightly because well, it's not possible because there's various projects that would need to have started 5 years ago to get there. I think the most realistic declaration is probably the one coming from Nottingham with all the work that they're doing and have been doing for many years around low carbon energy. But we're seeing a lot of work within the local authority space. So it's good to hear Katherine's statements there. Energy from waste is, in our view, is a very big circular economy opportunity that is only partially explored. So energy from waste being pick up waste, process it, turn it into electricity and power the homes that are providing the waste. But we do see heat often neglected. So as part of an energy from waste process, heat is generated and often just blown out of the roof. Given that heat is such a significant issue for the UK's energy mix, we think this could be done better. Heat is, of course, the most challenging area to decarbonise. I put the question there, where do we get heat from? At the moment, we burn gas. Generally, we burn gas. So there are no new gas connections from 2025, according to UK government. We think that's a very good step. But what's it going to be replaced with? So, yeah, the Climate Change Committee is saying 600,000 heat pumps need to be installed every year in order to facilitate the change. We also have some views on this. What role does hydrogen have in heat? What role really do heat pumps have? And particularly for densely populated areas, we think there's a significant role for district heating. So communally providing heat networks that can communally heat homes. So we're doing quite a lot of work in that area as well. So heat and hydrogen are probably the two areas we're focusing most of our efforts at the moment. But really the point, and there's 1,000 things I haven't mentioned on this screen as well, but the point we're making here is that net zero is a multifaceted problem and action is required pretty much everywhere. So I just wanted to zip through a few of the projects that we are involved with. So we're working with a large UK logistics company that's identified that it currently uses 80 million litres of diesel a year, and in 20 years time, it won't be using any diesel. So how are they going to do that? So we're working with them to develop a renewables or an electricity-based strategy, which will involve developing significant renewable capacity, developing hydrogen production facilities so that they can then transition their entire fleet across to firstly battery electric and then hydrogen. We're working with a British port at the moment to develop a project around hydrogen and ammonia. So ammonia actually is quite interesting, and I should catch up with Matt at Heathrow on this. Ammonia is essentially it's a substance that can be used as a fuel. It's hydrogen and nitrogen based as opposed to carbon. So if you burn ammonia, then there's zero carbon output, and it actually can be used specifically as a fuel. The maritime or shipping industry is looking at ammonia as the base fuel for shipping in the future. And given the significant carbon base for shipping, that would be a very large step. We have recently had an agreement with the Pacific Ocean island state to leverage the waters around the islands to see what we can do with it. The intent being to look at things like deep ocean thermal, offshore wind, solar in lagoons to start producing hydrogen and ammonia for export. We are working with, I should have a number, but I don't off the top of my head, but we're working with quite a few local authorities around the UK, looking at anything from leveraging land for renewables, looking at developing heat networks, looking at putting hydrogen hubs together. We've also recently completed a project for the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank, looking at how Costa Rica can leverage its by the end of this year, 100% carbon-free grid to transition to hydrogen as a fuel for transportation. That in turn became a study to look at how they could potentially use or take some of their power to export ammonia to the world markets. So start to redress the balance of payments. So we work at various different scales, as I'm trying to get across on this slide. Probably the most important is the bottom paragraph on the left. We take an energy systems-based approach to how we do things to drive efficiency. We look to balance demand generation and supply. One case study So we're working with Warwick District Council. They came to us with an interesting set of questions. So how do we do renewables? How do we do heat? How do we do hydrogen? How do we do microgeneration? And by the way, how do we get our planning policy in line to enable us to really drive towards net zero? So we produced a feasibility study with 5 components. So one was district heating. So how do we take a section of that district area and decarbonize the heating? That actually has evolved into a district-wide heat decarbonisation study for them, which we're just starting to progress. Renewable energy development, we identified 50 plus, so it's actually 59 megawatts of opportunity for solar PV and wind. Quite good grid constraints, so we're likely to be able to develop 16 to 20 megawatts of power. A lot of that power will be used to power a hydrogen hub for green hydrogen. So we've performed the feasibility for a hub to supply up to 60 vehicles, which would be initially underwritten by the local authorities' vehicles, so buses and refuse vehicles. Scale really is going to be the key. So yes, by all means, build the hydrogen hub, but you've also got to work with the surrounding market or the commercial market to see who else would buy the hydrogen. Microgeneration, so Warwick own a number of thousand of council homes, so they're asking, well, what do we do? How do we decarbonise those? So we've come up with I suppose a technology strategy, and we're also looking at how commercially we would help them to deliver. And development planning documentation. So frustratingly, just next to where one of the areas we were looking at, there are 2,000 homes being built, and they're all being connected to gas. You know, that doesn't really seem to be a particularly decarbonised solution. Of course, there's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing that shouldn't happen, other than it really shouldn't happen. You know, we're not going to be using gas in a few years' time now, and there are better solutions for that. Just wanted to have a splash page of some example of the clients we work with and the types of projects that we're involved with. So you'll see there a smattering of public and private sector, some very, very large entities and some quite small. So essentially we work with clients to help them deliver net zero, really focusing on the energy system. So really to wrap it all up, there's a lot to do. We still 80% to go. So I talked earlier on about 50% plus of the grid is carbon free. Well, power's only 20% of the problem. So yeah, we've really got to focus in on heat. There is a solid case for interventions. We're very good at building renewables. We're very good at building heat networks. We're very good at putting infrastructure in place, all of which can be delivered on a commercial basis. And of course, there are government schemes which can help to unlock interventions that perhaps don't make commercial sense right now. Rooftops, in my mind, should be a given. If you've got something above you and it's not going to do anything else, then put solar on it. It's quite easy. Just do it. We think innovative supply structures will drive growth, and we've seen some very interesting developments in the market, in the energy supply market over the last couple of years, starting to install batteries and solar schemes and starting to balance those against the grid. We think that's quite exciting. Final point, we all have a role to play here. We will help. We're there to help. Local authorities have a role. We help them. Big corporates, whoever it is, we all have a role to play. So the point on the right, we work public sector, private, commercial, industrial, and of course, across the piece. So that is my whistle-stop tour of Meld and some of the things we're doing, and I hope I didn't take too much time.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Thank you. As I say, these events, that I find them fascinating, but I am aware we are running horribly over time. We're almost 11:30 when we're due to stop, but I think we'll plough on regardless. Next up is Conor O'Broin from Spark Motos, battery-powered motorbikes, low maintenance, low cost, zero emissions, and fun to drive. Conor, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Can I just check, can my screen be seen, Sally?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Thanks very much, Sally, and participants, for the opportunity to present today. My name is Conor O'Broin. I'm one of the directors of Spark Motos, and we are the only electric-only retailer of motorcycles in the southeast of England. I'll briefly go through 3 areas: the benefits of electric motorcycles, which include environmental, ease of ownership, cost of ownership, some oversight on range and pricing, and then I'd like to conclude with an overview of commuting options, particularly as it pertains to the current COVID environment. And Sally, I'll do my utmost to be efficient and do it in 10 minutes. The benefits of electric motorcycles are kindness to the environment. In terms of transference of power, electric motors are 90% efficient versus 30% for traditional petrol and diesel. Energy recovery is standard in most models. There's no direct pollution or CO2, no noise, no oil or coolant, and no greasy chain. In terms of ease of ownership, you can be on an electric motorcycle after a half-day course, which are organised throughout the UK. They cost typically around £130. Our models start at a weight of around 60 kilograms. There's no starting issues, you just charge the machine and go. And the batteries can be removed for home office, charging on moped, and for 11 kilowatt model motorcycles, I beg your pardon. There's no clutch or gearbox, it's stall resistant. Most models are fully connected via smartphone app that provides status and location. They are jam busting, and that's been well established in terms of journey times on a motorcycle over traditional cars. And in Westminster, parking is typically £1 per day, and indeed it's free in many car parks. You also have access to bus lanes. In terms of costs, the government under current ULEZ legislation provides a 20% grant up to £1,500 on the cost of a machine. There's no road tax, and the cost is typically under a penny a mile, which if you compare that to petrol or diesel is around 600 miles per gallon. As you all know, the vast majority of what we pay in petrol is tax. And the comparison there is that electricity attracts a 5% VAT tax in comparison to 65% taxes that are paid on hydrocarbon fuels that go into cars and motorcycles. There is very little maintenance due to so few moving parts. And in terms of servicing, the replacement parts tend to typically be brakes and tires. Electric motorcycles are exempt from congestion charging as well as ULEZ. In terms of range and charging, which is an issue we get questioned about very considerably, it varies. The mopeds can be from 25 miles and that can go up to 70 miles if there's a twin battery installed. Light motorcycles are from 50 to 80 miles, and then fixed battery models are typically from 100 to 160. Clearly, urban riding at a constant speed delivers the greatest range. And mains charging typically takes from 4 to 8 hours. The larger models are compatible with EV chargers and can take from 1 to 4 hours to charge. On our website, www.sparkmotos.com, we've highlighted our range of machines across various classes. And that can range from a basic moped at £2,000 the whole way up to high performance models. And indeed, we've just become a distributor for a brand called Energica, which is a customized performance sport motorcycle from Italy. In terms of the light motorcycle class, they start from under 2.7 thousand to 4.7. The high performance models start at around 10,000. Okay, finally, I'd just like to conclude with a brief overview of where electric motorcycles stand in the context of other commuting options. We believe the market will expand in an overall basis due to the relative simplicity, cost effectiveness, shortest travel times for commuters on motorcycles, as well as the eco-friendliness component. Crowded road space is becoming marginalized in favor of empty cycle lanes. Average journey times are increasing, especially for cars, and indeed increased congestion negatively impacts on air quality. Cycling has limited appeal and is mainly, in our view, a short to medium distance option. We also engage, we find, with increasingly lady motorcyclists who are interested in this concept. And we've noticed that only 30% of bike journeys in London are currently undertaken by women. Public transport is fraught with infection issues and is only, in our view, a partial solution as it's not door to door. Kick scooters, there's been a lot of debate about them. They're suitable for short journeys and their usage is very much a legal grey area. Motorcycles frequently are the quickest and least expensive door-to-door solution, and you can get a seat. In terms of the overall market, we've been informed by industry sources that electric sales have increased up to 4.5 times in comparison to this period last year, and May sales were some 10 times over the last year. And that's not surprising, given that the market is going to ultimately move towards electric only under UK government legislation. I'd like to thank you all very much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you very much, Conor. It does sound the way forward. I must admit, my husband once owned a scooter and I rode pillion once and never again, but there you go. Last up, sorry, I'm horribly aware of the time, as you all know. Last up is Winston Gordon from London Bike Hub. Over to you, and I think you've got a cheering video to show us.
Yes, I've got a couple of videos to show you, actually. Right, yeah, it's Winston Gordon from London Bike Hub. We have a workshops based in Greenford, and also recently just opened in Brentford, workshop on the High Street here. We're a not-for-profit organisation, limited by guarantee. And what we do basically is we service and repair bikes, anything bike related. That's where we're at. So I've got a couple of videos to show you, but before I do that, I just want to say something about how COVID has impacted or affected the way people travel recently. Yeah, in the last year, we've seen an exponential rise in the number of people taking to their bikes, getting out their cars and taking to their bikes. And I wouldn't have thought that COVID would have had this sort of impact, but it has. And as a result of that, with the workshop I have here in Brentford, the number of cyclists or people wanting to cycle has just increased exponentially. It's really been a tidal change in terms of the way people transport themselves, as well as transporting goods. So the first video I'm going to show you is about the bike recycling that we do. I must say that a lot of people that are coming to the workshop want to either buy a new bike, but they're also not averse to buying a used bike. So what normally happens is we're taking donated bikes and basically recycle them, bring them up to date, new components, new parts, and then we'll sell them on. Any profit we make goes back into the business so that we can buy more parts to further do bike recycling. So it's cyclical in that way. Anyway, enough about me talking. Let's show you the video so it gives you an idea of what we do. And the second video would be about the logistics side of the business. Okay, just bear with me. Okay, so that's basically the bike recycling. Oops, sorry. Okay, can you, right, so that's basically the bike recycling side of the business. The other thing that I've been, that London Bike Hub have been involved in is a e-bike, cargo bike trial in Chiswick, whereby we're using e-bikes, e-cargo bikes to do local deliveries. Basically, during lockdown, we were finding that shops weren't open to the general public, but they still wanted to trade. So we partnered up with a organisation called Our High Road, and basically they had an app where people could basically buy produce from the high street, and then we would deliver those produce using our cargo bikes on a predetermined time window. The other places where we've been using these cargo bikes have been with Chiswick Flower Market and another organisation, Imperfect Creative Cooking, whereby they, rather than food going out to waste, we would take that food and make from a menu, would make up a meal, and on a Friday we would then use our e-cargo bikes to deliver those meals to people that have ordered the menu using the e-cargo bikes. And but the whole idea of the concept behind Perfect Creative Cooking was that everything's done with non-plastic involvement. So basically they use tiffin tins to actually deliver the food. Anyway, enough about that. Let's show the video. Just one moment, please. Sorry, let me start that again. Okay, so that's the logistic. That's the logistic side of the business. which we continue to do. I must say, one of the things that we're quite interested in is what happens after the 23rd of October when the ULEZ restrictions come into play, the North and South Circular. Going to see potentially quite a lot of businesses wanting to decarbonise the way that they do their supply chain. So yeah, it'd be interesting what happens around there. So yeah, the bike, to me, it's one of man's best inventions, and it's often overlooked. It's not until now that we're seeing how valuable it is in terms of active travel and social prescribing. Particularly during the pandemic, we've seen that a lot of people are taking to the bikes as a form of exercise and as well as social well-being, mental well-being as well. Any questions? Thanks.
There was a comment in the chat box. Robin Cairns' sons want to get rid of their bikes. So
yeah,
I'll the web address in the chat box for everybody. So that's great. Alan, do you want to just wrap up quickly? I'm aware that we're already 11:42, so we're well over time. So just, yeah, thank you all, one and all. Over to Alan.
Well, we save some time by working from home, don't we? So it's a good thing that we've invested it in listening to how we're going to save the planet. My God, of all the things to run out of to save some time with, we don't want to save it here. At the Hounslow Chamber of Commerce, Sally and I have both decided that we should have a focus on trying to work with companies, especially if they have an environmental or a sustainable product. We've helped companies who do airflow systems. We're talking to lots of other companies from Winston to Chris to Barney to try to work through how we can best help those companies get their products delivered, especially into organisations like Hounslow Council, who have made a wonderful decision to spend this thing called a Hounslow Pound in Hounslow. Well done, you guys. And we want to try and get those companies who've got a really good environmentally sustainable product into Hounslow Council especially, and also down into Heathrow Airport. What a wonderful way to have a morning listening to all of your presentations. It's really good to hear. And we look forward to working really closely with all of you to help make a sustainable business out of all of this. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much. Well summed up, Alan. Thank you. Thank you to all our speakers, to Hounslow Council for making this happen. Thank you very much. Keep safe and hope to see you at our regeneration event on the 23rd of July, holiday in Brentford Lock. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.